Well, hello there. Chrismo here. So I've heard a lot now on the Paramount Decrees, and what I've not heard so much of is other content creators talking about this. And the first thing I want to get out of the way before I even get into this video is this was all Super Stevenn, also aka Just Another Ape on YouTube. Highly recommend checking out his channel because as far as I know, he is the originator of everything you're about to see. And like I mentioned, I haven't heard anything really discussing this in detail. So just to be really clear, everything you're about to hear, he was the originator of, and he actually ended a live stream earlier today that was on this topic. So highly recommend his channel. And with that, let's get into it. So what are the Paramount Decrees? Well, essentially, I have a lot of links up on the screen, but it comes from a court case that was back in 1948, and really there was a whole undertow going on leading up to that court case. So here it is. So the Paramount Decrees came from this court case in 1948, which was the United States versus Paramount. So it was such a big deal that it made it to the Supreme Court. United States versus Paramount 334 U.S. 131. From the Antitrust Division, and the defendants entered into a series of consent decrees, collectively called the Paramount Decrees. So, before I talk more into this, I wanted to, I looked more into this antitrust, like what is it? Why the word trust? So this division handles essentially something that goes way back to 1890, which was this ruling in a different court case preventing the general public companies from a very large minority, which were creating trusts, which still exists today, but it was a big problem back then. So essentially what a lot of these larger companies were doing was kind of implementing these practices, which we'll get into more in a little bit, which is vertical integration, a oligopoly, which is essentially a monopoly, and certainly excluding other companies that wish to participate in these trusts, so that so these shares in a stock, essentially, so it was based on a commodity company, name whatever it is, sugar, oil, gold, or otherwise. A very small minority, so like let's say 6 to 7 like even individuals, really the entity type doesn't matter, would be given exclusive access to these trusts. And there was a big conflict of interest with this. So that was the whole basis on this 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. So that's what this is talking about here. So for example, January 2nd, 1882, the Standard Oil Trust was formed by an attorney, Samuel Dodd. A board of trustees was set up, and all the Standard properties were placed in its hands. Each stockholder received 20 trust certificates just for them, for each share of the Standard Oil stock. All the profits and component companies were sent to the 9 trustees who determined the dividends. The 9 trustees elected the director of officers of all the component companies. So there it is. Another interesting thing this article mentions is that this was a big campaign. This is back when presidents actually implemented while they were in office what they promised they would, running during President Theodore Roosevelt's trust-busting campaign at the turn of the century. The Sherman Antitrust Act was used with considerable success, essentially using the full power of this court ruling. And it was a huge success. The reason being, this still holds power and weight to this day, and trusts essentially still have considerably less power today because this was implemented in the first place. And I'll just go down here to Sec 1 from the Antitrust Act. Every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce, so a big concern of the Federal Trade Commission, essentially, or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is hereby declared to be illegal. Not prior to 1890, but as of 1890, I think July 2nd is when this was implemented. Every person who shall make any such contract or engage in any such combination or conspiracy shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, and or conviction thereof shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $5,000, which was a lot back then, or by imprisonment not exceeding 1 year. Okay, so not like a life sentence, but it was still a big deal. It was at the very least a misdemeanor to have a contract in the form of a trust or otherwise, or other conspiracy that restrains trade or commerce. So this was a big deal. And now I'll go back to this. Also, to be clear, I am providing my own due diligence, so I'll be providing that as well. But the source of everything I'm talking about is not my own. Do not give me credit. Give Super Steven credit. That's what I was mentioning earlier. So that's what this article is getting to. If you aren't aware, that Paramount Decrees are an agreement between the Department of Justice and Paramount Picture that prevents film studios from owning theaters, also known as the Hollywood antitrust case of 1948. So the Sherman Antitrust Trust was gave way to the whole issue brought forward in the Supreme Court case, and they ruled in favor of the theaters, also known as exhibitors. These houses that have all these screens that allow us to view movies to this day. So that was the case. United States versus Paramount Pictures, Inc. So what was going on? Well, in the late 30s and 40s, film studios owned their own theaters, conflict of interest, that exhibited their films. Some were partnerships, others were owned outright. And that's a thing called vertical integration, which is they own the rights, the not the land, but the theater, the license, all of that. And it's also a form of oligopoly that not eliminates, but it reduces competition, pushes us out, and prevents any new competitors coming onto the market from competing. At the time, there weren't paid like notable actors such as Tom Cruise, Will Smith, or Angelina Jolie. Everyone was just an employee of the studio. They owned everything, including the artists. So this was brought to light originally in 1938. This was going on when major movie studios sued under the Sherman Antitrust Act. So there you go. They sued Paramount Pictures, the largest studio at the time. And at the time, they were the big five. That they were like it's showing here, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, 20th Century Fox, Universal Pictures. Actually, even before this, it was Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Warner Bros., Paramount, Fox, and RKO were the big five. But this is what the full list of them at the time. The case was settled in 1940, so still building up to the large court case. They didn't back off, essentially. So with a consent decree, this agreement allowed the government to resume prosecution if the studios failed to comply with certain requirements. The big conditions were no block booking. So essentially, all those screens that I talked about, they can't bring a whole wide array of different films that they're like. Oftentimes, there's just one license for each. It's like, okay, here's all my movies. You will play all these. That's block booking, which it says right here. It allows features for up to 5 films. Okay, so there's a limit. No blind buying. So essentially, with AMC, what Adam Aaron can do is sit in, like as the owner of the theater chain, to see, is this movie going to be good or bad before I even play in the theaters. If it sucks, I don't want to do it. If it's good, good. But blind buying removes this power from the theater chain owners, or CEOs, higher ups. But trade showing is allowed. Special screenings for theater representatives to watch films before booking. An administrative board was created to enforce these requirements. Okay. There was back and forth. So pretty much the struggle was between the massive film studios and the exhibitors. Very separate, in that essentially, if the big film studios at the time also owned the theaters, that's obviously a conflict of interest with the theater owners themselves. So the studios obviously wanted to also own the theaters, but this was the ongoing struggle. So we get to the decree, which allowed more independent movie theaters all over the country, which is just, this feels old school, but this was not old school back then. Like the way it looked like back then was, it was a big mafia of just these, what was originally the big five, versus the exhibitors, the theaters themselves. What the decree also allowed was the beginning of the end of the old, so old by today's standards, Hollywood studio system, which gave people ability to leverage in regards to how they work and how much they make. More independent producers, it gave rise to that. And these independent film projects, foreign films. When was the last time you saw a foreign film at a major AMC theater that was, treated as more important than the recent Marvel superhero movie, and then less censorship in film due to the increase in filmmakers. Okay, so that was very important. And what's happening is this decree is being rendered useless. It's not going to have power anymore because of a court ruling. After 70 plus years, which is how long ago 1948 was. So if this sounds like a huge deal, it is. And it's going to affect AMC in many different ways. But Super Stevenn already did a good job of going through that. So more of the purposes of me making this video is to kind of go into the impact. And by that, I mean the impact that has already happened. because this went into effect August 7th, 2020, and was given a 2-year extension to August 7th of this year, 2022. That is, at the time of this video, exactly 2 weeks away. So, yeah, what is this impact? So, there you go. It was terminated. So, here's... let me see if I can find that. Okay, here we go. This comes from, kind of similar to if you went on sec.gov, you would see something similar where you can submit comments depending on if they allowed them. So if they allowed comments, you could leave comments here, pending approval and all that. So notice who the commenters are. All these theater chains. And there are some others in here supporting theater chains that are just larger supporting companies and associations like this one. Competition in Digital Entertainment. I don't know what entity type that is. And then there was also, what was it? Well, the Writers Guild of America, they commented. And there was one other one that I saw in here. I didn't read through all these, but I read through about, I want to say down to there. It took a long time, and I actually learned a lot from going through those, which I'll show a few of those in just a moment. Well, I'll say what it is. So another comment you would find here is from NATO, which is not what you think. It stands for National Association of Theater Owners. Actually, no, they weren't the ones that commented. It was the Independent Cinema Alliance, which is in support of the smaller cinemas, the independent, for independent films. So let's go through some of them. Not entirely, but just some, some interesting comments that they left for this, the judges that wanted to overturn this, basically. So this was back in 2018 before it actually was dissolved about 2 years later, basically. So this was, at the time, it was October 2018. So this guy, so Bengi's Drive-In Theater, an interesting comment, which I agree with, which states, at the time of the decree, the monetary situation of studios getting income from films was not as it is today. Like those actors that was mentioned in the other article. They were not given any residual or ongoing flow of income. Once the movie was released, distributors kept the income, had very little circumstances to share that income with any other person who provided intellectual property. So I looked at that. It's any product of human intellect that law protects from unauthorized use of others. So that's essentially what he was saying there. It had very little circumstance to share that income with any other person who provided intellectual property or contracting rights to residual income. But obviously now with online streaming services, there are many, many more ways of distributing this income. So now it's more of a problem today. Like, protect us, the smaller guy, essentially what they're saying there. This was someone, I forget what their exact name was. But essentially, it was a theater chain that was still around in present day, and they've had multiple run-ins even while this decree was in effect for many decades, and this was one such experience. So they were up against the original MGM, that's the Metro Goldwyn Mayer, in part for block booking and a clearance issue, so being the first to show it on their screens. MGM was in clear violation and had little choice but to settle and pay me in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement so as to avoid an inevitably unfavorable ruling. Afterward, I became a resource for the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, so they came to his rescue. I was a little guy that had successfully stood up to one of the giants. He did this multiple times, by the way. So that was one such theater chain. Very successful, small, independent theater, but would obviously be in danger now that this decree is being lifted. Okay, so this is Competition in Digital Entertainment, that company I showed before. So not a theater. If we go down to 2, they address this statement from the court. Our existing antitrust laws, including the precedent of the United States versus Paramount and its progenies, anyone else associated with that, that are lower down on the chain, or came after, I should say. That's what they mean. Sufficient or insufficient to protect competition in the motion picture industry. So what say you, basically? And they brought up online video distributors and the on-demands from all these streaming services. And they say this very much poses the anti-competitive conditions to be worried about on their connected devices. So basically, they do a whole hit piece on Netflix. And keep in mind, again, this is from 2018. Just a whole, pages and pages and pages. It's like, well, let me tell you about Netflix. And you think this doesn't apply to movie theaters? Well, it certainly does. Just because the technology's advanced way more since 1948, it still applies. Basically mentioning here that they have buttons or remote controls at the expense of competitors, even preventing consumers, allowing TVs to track their Netflix history, foreclosing consumers from creating digital bookmarks to save their favorite shows, receiving recommendations. So basically tapping into their data, which Netflix has been allowed to do for a while. And let me see if I can find this quote. There's a whole table for what companies can control what. There was a show, House of Cards, at the time that they use as a pretty big example of Netflix abusing their power. I think we're still getting to it. But essentially what the quote is saying is, to the 52 people out there that have rewatched this very specific show for 18 straight days in a row, all 52 of you, it's like, what past traumas are you trying to cover up? It's like, what the hell, Netflix? How do you know this information? Why do you just have this access to our data, which comes from these privacy disclosure agreements, which are literally over 1,000 pages, that they have their streaming consumers signing? And no one's going to read all that. So just, big conflict of interest. And I mean, these were out there. I know there wasn't a lot that was submitted. This is all of them, but they were out there. Some of these articles were powerful. I got the whole world of the industry and the impact of just what would be lost And obviously not yet, but after August 7th, like, you have to imagine what is going to change. It's going to be a whole other world, basically. This mentions block booking, so it's the practice that prevents exhibitors from licensing single features on their individual merits. Although distributors may license firms in blocks or groups under the decrees, distributors cannot condition the offer on an exhibitor's license of another feature or group of features during a given period. And here they mention the National Association of Theater Owners. The main thing that I saw just across these articles in general was block booking would not be appropriate for, and that's what the decrees are protecting against, is that overbearing power of the larger film studios on exhibitors. And the main idea of block booking in particular is that it's for certain towns in these small towns in other states, it's not appropriate for block booking to like have any presence in that town. It's like some of these towns are like large tourist attractions where a large portion of their population at any period of the year are people from out of town. They didn't go there just to see Marvel, which is exactly what would happen. They don't have a lot of screens. They'll have like 3 or 4. Anyone that's been to a small town, you know that's how it is. So block booking, totally inappropriate for that. And it's a very strong argument against eliminating the decrees, but yet it happened anyway. It's going to have a huge impact, even on AMC. So something's going to have to change. And again, Super Stevenn goes into this in detail in his videos, and he explains exactly what Adam Aaron's next steps should be and what potentially we could be seeing on August 4th, which, by the way, I'll just mention it here, even though Super Stevenn already did it. August 4th, that's not just AMC's earnings report, it's also Paramount's. So that's interesting. There was no announcement as to why that is. It's just how those happen to line up. And again, August 7th, that's when this decree is ending. So I'm not saying one way or the other. That's not to say that Paramount and AMC are joining up or any proposals being made, but it's definitely very interesting. Okay, so I'll get to the last thing, which this came from Super Stevenn's stream. He actually showed this earlier today. So this is updated as of July 21st. These are the box office reports. And we can see which ones are losers. I know there's red numbers and not green, but basically these are gains if they're not red. The Rise of Gru profited more than $250 million. That's huge. And then Black Phone released recently, just behind it, more than $50 million. There were some notable flops. Bob Burgers. Super Stevenn mentioned this earlier. Lightyear was a big flop. 170 million lost. And then obviously last year, a big flop was Matrix Resurrections, almost 200 million lost. But look, Paramount was the film studio for these big winners. And let me just show them, if I can. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, under 4 million. And then the obvious one, I almost typed it because I couldn't see it. 550 million and growing. Top Gun Maverick. That is a Paramount film. So that's that's another big one. And then overall, the domestic box office, I haven't updated this today. Okay, well, it's still the same. Top Gun Maverick is the #1 release for the year. And just one more thing to note here, how the movie theater industry has changed as a whole, certainly since 1948. That's how many releases we have so far in July. 1977, which just Star Wars just shows how big of a success it was at the time. 9 releases for the year. 1977, so very different landscape back then, and certainly less movies being shown on screens. In 1982, there were 132 releases, and then last year, 2021, 438, but still catching back up to years prior. Like in 2012, 807 releases. That's when The Avengers came out. That's 2007, going further back in time. 2016, 855. So the releases were getting more and more. But essentially, look how much we've grossed. We've already made that much for the year, and already more than last year. So that's basically what I wanted to bring to your attention. I'm sorry this went on for so long. I hope, Super Stevenn, that I did you justice. I just wanted to put something out there to bring it to the public's attention. There's not enough videos on this, guys. But essentially, if there was anything else I wanted to mention, well, yes, I may as well mention it, but I didn't realize how long this would be. My stance on what Adam Aaron will do is in agreement with Super Stevenn. He will not partner with Netflix or Disney. The main reasons being, I'll just show this. There we go. Fox Films and Disney merger for $71 billion was approved. That's one of the biggest mergers. And what is entirely what you see nowadays are just all those big Marvel and Warner Brothers films. It's just massive. And it shows why that is. Like this merger, why was this approved? It wasn't even approved back in 2018, reading through those articles. But shortly thereafter, it was. And then their long-term debt is $46.62 billion year over year. This was as of the end of March. Very large compared to the current assets they have on hand, like the amount they have in their bank. Netflix, by comparison, $14.5 billion. Still a lot. Not nearly as much as Disney. And here's a reason in support of Paramount Global is Warren Buffett invested 69 million shares to Paramount, not AMC, but to Paramount. And they are now the #1 shareholder, Warren Buffett. Scarlett Johansson was not the only one affected, but essentially she was rug pulled by Disney Studios when they breached a contract, which stated that for a certain number of weeks, her film, the Black Widow film, would only be shown in theaters. But they didn't do that. They also streamed it. So Scarlett Johansson sued them basically for that reason. And then price gouging is something that Disney does a lot. So essentially the big one here, as far as, so obviously national emergencies or disasters would be a good excuse for sudden erratic changes in price, but the main one this year is just inflation. But they've used this excuse multiple times. which you can't do that even if inflation is on the rise. Like, you should not unreasonably raise your prices without letting the people know first. And they've been caught doing this multiple times, which includes their fast passes to their theme park and Disney Plus platform markups on the subscriptions. So anyways, that's what I got for this video. If you guys can, please, I'm going to link videos that Super Stevenn, Just Another Ape, already has on his channel. He's already had this up for weeks now, so please go and watch those. They're super informative. I'll have links to both his videos in the description. And with that, guys, I'm posting all my receipts, all the links that I mainly used for this. I might even post some more in addition to that. Feel free to read through as much or as little as this as you want. All the information's there. And yeah, this is a big deal, guys. So with that, thank you so much for watching through all this video if you made it. And I will catch you guys in the next one.